Yes, good morning. My name is Stephen Clark. I work for the U.S. Small Business Administration Office of Disaster Recovery and Resilience, and I'm here to talk about the disaster relief available from the SBA in Bennington County. Now, I'm in Vermont because of the severe storms and floods which took place July 7th through the 17th. In response to that disaster, it was then declared as a federal presidential disaster declaration. So under that declaration, 9 counties were declared to be primary counties to receive individual assistance from FEMA and to receive physical damage disaster loans from the SBA. But Bennington County is not one of those counties. But because Bennington is contiguous to those counties, and in the southern part of the state, those counties would be Rutland County and Windham County, Windsor County. So if you know people in those counties, please direct them to apply for FEMA assistance and for SBA physical damage disaster loans before the application deadline of October 12th, 2023. But for the viewership and your constituents in Bennington County or other contiguous counties to the disaster area, which might be in New York State or even in Massachusetts or could even be in New Hampshire, the economic injury disaster loans are available in all 9 of the primary counties as well as all the contiguous counties. So I want to give you some information about those today because that is and what may be most useful to private nonprofits and for small businesses in this area to recover from the disaster. So an economic injury disaster loan is a working capital loan, and it is to be used to pay for the ordinary and necessary operating expenses of the private nonprofit or the business. So this could be for paying utilities or rent or wages for employees or for equipment or supplies. The idea is this funds would allow the nonprofit or business to recover to where they were before the disaster had caused interruptions to their business. So the types of interruptions that may have happened to your nonprofit or business, perhaps your customer base might have been disrupted, maybe due to the disaster they were unable to get to your business, or in the case of in Bennington County, I have spoken to some people who've said that generally some people who were going to come to Vermont as tourists may have not come because the overall scene of the storms and the floods may have, for lack of a better term, scared them away, and they decided that they would come later or something like that. Well, so for any individual person, maybe losing one customer is not a big deal. But if thousands and thousands of people act like that and decide that they're going to delay their travel plans or cancel, that could have a very large economic impact. It could be the first order consequences that if you have a business that serves a tourist clientele, that maybe you have less revenue. But also it could be if you have a business that services those businesses, or you have a business that services the employees or suppliers of that business, that could also be an adverse effect and could be why you would need such a disaster loan. Another example could be that your employees may have been unable to get to work. Maybe they live in one of the areas that had more physical damage. I know that a number of roads were damaged and a number of people were unable to travel as they might have wanted to because of that kind of damage. So perhaps your employees were unable to get to work, and if you didn't have the employees you needed, perhaps you had to cut back on what you were offering, have reduced operating hours, or maybe not be able to work the number of clients or the amount of work you had already agreed to work. So that could be another reason, because of interruption to your employee base, that you might have lost revenue because of the disaster, even if you were not in an area that was physically damaged. Another example that might be a reason why you'd want to take an economic injury disaster loan would be that it may be that your employees and that your customer base was not particularly affected, but perhaps you have suppliers. Maybe the suppliers were damaged, or due to damage to transportation or difficulty with moving things around, that maybe your suppliers were unable to get you the materials that you need to operate your business, and that this was the disruption type that caused you to have lost revenue, because you may have been able to service all of your customer base or your clientele, but if you did not have the supplies you need from your suppliers, well, then perhaps you were not able to do that amount of business and you had a loss in revenue, and would also be in a situation where you might want to consider applying for this type of economic injury disaster loan to help you recover from the floods. So those are three examples of types of disruptions which would be reasons why a nonprofit or business would want to apply for an economic injury disaster loan. Now I would like to review some of the good points about all of our disaster loan programs in terms of the disaster loans and things to think about on them. So first of all, there is no application fee for these SBA disaster loans. So these are subsidized emergency loans. They are directly from the U.S. Treasury, and the idea is we want to reduce the turnaround time. So between the time you apply and the time that you would be approved and have funds dispersed, to have that time be as short as possible, because we do appreciate that the people applying in these circumstances are people who have had a lot of interruptions, whether it's physical damage or economic injury, because of, in the case of Vermont, the storms and the floods, and that they need the money to begin their recovery as soon as possible. This brings me to my second point, which is there is no obligation to take an SBA loan after the loan is approved. And as a matter of fact, once your loan is approved, you have a minimum of 60 days to decide if your nonprofit or your business wants to take the loan. And you can ask your loan officer for additional time after that, so you can decide, what amount of funds you would need, but also if you even need the funds at all. Perhaps you have other sources of funding you have been able to get together, and you don't need the economic injury disaster loan. Then you would not have to take the economic injury disaster loan, even though you had applied and been approved. But most importantly, I would say, the sooner you do apply, the sooner you could be approved, and then you'd be able to decide. And so if you wait and take longer to apply, of course it would take you more time to be approved and receive those funds. And if you really need them, we want you to have them sooner rather than later. This brings us to my third point that I like to highlight about all the SBA disaster loans, which is there is no prepayment penalty. So as soon as you are able to begin earning additional revenue and have the funds able to pay down or pay off the SBA loan, you are able to pay it off as soon as you want, and there is no prepayment penalty. So even though we offer terms of up to 30 years in some circumstances, you don't have to take that amount of time. If you are able to recover and say are able to make and be able to pay back the loan in 1 to 2 years, good for you. And you do not need to continue to make payments over some larger span, because there is no prepayment penalty. But on the other hand, for the nonprofits and businesses, if you are in a situation where you really need the funds to recover and it's going to take your business some time to return to the revenue levels that it had before the disaster, there are two more. I say these would be points number 4 and point number 5 that I like to highlight. And 4 and 5 are that there is no accrued interest for the first 12 months after your first disbursement on the loan, and second, that for the first 12 months after your first disbursement there are no required payments. So your nonprofit or business has time to begin the recovery process and be getting revenue before you do have to make that required payment. So that is another advantage of this type of loan to help you make a recovery. So I hope this announcement and this message I provided has provided some good information about what is available from both the SBA, so the United States Small Business Administration, and from FEMA. But specifically, this spoke about economic injury disaster loans. I want to reinforce that the application deadline for those for private nonprofits and small businesses is April 15th, 2024. But if you do know anyone in the areas where there were physical damage in Vermont, please encourage your friends or neighbors or colleagues, or really whoever you know, that if they have physical damage, to please apply both for FEMA assistance and for SBA physical damage disaster loans by the application deadline of October 12th, 2023. Thank you very much for hearing me out, and more information is available at the SBA website at disasterloanassistance.sba.gov. Thank you.